But hello everyone and welcome to this B1 usability package feature focus session. Today the session is going to be about advanced macro commands, and like with any other language, the macro system have some basic commands like set and transfer, but it also have some more advanced commands like PopFormStack and prompt. In this session I'll be looking at some of the commands, and then I'll give an example of how you can use them. So the value for you if you're new to the macro system is that you'll get to see what it can actually do, or some of it, and the value if you already know the macro system is that you'll see some of the more advanced commands that you might not have used. The macro system is a scripting system that uses commands for working and interacting with the UI in SAP. It's basically a set of commands, like I think we got over 30 now, that can interact with the UI. For example, you can set a value in a field, you can color a field, and so on. And it's based on one command per line. And a command may take none to many parameters, and if it takes multiple parameters, they are separated by a pipe. Today I'm going to be using the dynamic syntax quite a lot, so I hope you know it. But otherwise it's basically about getting values from the screen and using them. And the example is here where you specify the dynamic syntax as item, column, type, and row, and this way you can pull out values from fields on the screen. The macro system works in combination with a B1 validation, a function button, or line loop, or something else. And it cannot be run by itself, so you need something to trigger it. In the session today I'm going to use a function button and a B1 validation, but otherwise you can also run it from a line loop, but that's outside the scope of this session. Inside the macro system, besides the commands, you also have something we call conditional commands, and that is that you can create if and else logic for more advanced scenarios. You can use stores, like a variable to store data that you pull out from the screen or from the database, and then you can later on compare it in your if and else statements and use it in the commands. And then we have a debugger that will help you actually go through the macro line by line to debug what it actually does. But let's go into SAP and start creating our first macro. So we're going to create a very simple macro, and then we're going to expand it with some more advanced logic. But to start with, we are just going to create a macro that can open the sales quotation window, and then can transfer the card code from the business partner screen into the sales quotation screen. And we're going to be using a function button to trigger it. So we start out by creating a new function button. And we link it to a universal function of the type macro. The first thing we want to do is we want to open the sales quotation window, and to do this we have a wizard down here that contains all of the commands that we have in the system. So the list is quite big now. But basically we want to activate a menu UID, so we want to open a window using the menu UID of the window. And actually here in the arguments list we have the sales quotation here. But if we didn't have it in here as a predefined one, you can always find it inside SAP by enabling system information. And then you can go up and find the menu item, and then you can move your mouse over it, and in the bottom left corner you will see the menu UID that you need to put into the macro command. So if we go ahead and insert it, we can now open the sales quotation window, and then we want to take the value from this field here and transfer it into this field here on the sales quotation. So to do this, we're going to use the dynamic syntax, and the only thing we actually need to know here is the UID of the field. In this case, this field is called 5, again, bottom left corner, and this field here is called 4. So if we go in and say we want to use the transfer command, with a source to a target, and we want to use the dynamic syntax, and we insert it, then we just need to replace this here with a 5. We don't have any column and we don't have any types, we're just going to use a string. And we also do the same here. Let's add it. We add the function button configuration as well. Then when we open the business partner, navigate to the customer, and we press the button, it will open the sales quotation and it will transfer the card code from the business partner screen to the sales quotation screen. Now if I go to a supplier and I press the same button, then it's of course going to fail and give me an error because I cannot use a supplier on a sales quotation, but I would like to have this button be able to both open a sales quotation and a purchase quotation depending on the type of the customer. So to do this, we're going to change our macro a bit, and we're going to create a conditional statement. So we're going to use an if statement to say that if we are on a supplier right now, we want to open the purchase quotation, otherwise we want to open the sales quotation. So the if syntax works a bit like if you have used it in SQL, but basically you're going to need to say I want to compare something with something else. In this case we want to compare the value of this field here, so the field that defines what type the customer is. We want to compare that one to a string value. So if it's a supplier, this field will contain an S. So if we go in and say the dynamic syntax for this field and say if this is equal to an S, then we want to do something, and if it's not equal to an S, then we want to do something else. So the conditional syntax is that you have a statement, then you have a begin and an end, and inside the begin and the end, if this statement here is fulfilled, these commands here will be run, and otherwise these commands down here will be run. So in this case we also need to change this to be the menu UID of the purchase quotation. So let's just find it here. And that's purchase. And then we try to enable the debugger so that we can see what actually happens. We press the button, then we get the debugger. And the debugger just shows the entire macro, and then you can step through it line by line to see what actually happens. So if we just start out by pressing next line, we can see that it evaluates the statements as true. So we get into the purchase part of the macro, and if we step through it, let me just move it a bit over here, we can see that it opens the purchase quotation and it then transfers the customer. And then the macro is done, so if we say next, it says macro completed. If we do the same on a customer, we'll see that it jumps to the else part, Again, it activates a menu item and it transfers the value. Now, what I have done is I've also created a user-defined table. And in that user-defined table, down here at the bottom, I have added two records, one for the customer and one for the supplier. And this is my default items. So I want to, when I press the create quotation button, I want to ask the user, do we want to insert a default item? And if they say yes, I want to insert the default item on the quotation. And if they say no, I don't want to do anything. So to actually do this, we are going to have to ask them a question if they want to do something or not. But before we do that, we actually want to check if there is defined a default item for the customer, because if you haven't defined a default item, then there's no reason to actually ask them. So to do this, you can use stores. So a store is just a variable where you can store some data in, and then you can use it for comparison later on, or use it in a command. But in this case, I want to take out, using SQL, the item code that was in my table for this currently selected customer. So I'll go in and say I want to select the item code from my table, where the code is equal to my customer. And then I just wanted to execute the logic here like it has already done. But then I want to say if the store is different from empty, then I want to ask the user if they want to insert a default line. And to insert the default line, I'm going to use a prompt. So I'm going to prompt the user to ask them a question. And if I look at the prompt in here in the wizard, I can see that it can show a yes, no prompt, and afterwards it can run based on what is answered. If it's a yes, it can run a UF, and if it's a no, it just won't do anything. So my question is, do we want to insert a default line? And if they answer yes, then I want to run a second macro that actually inserts the default line. And this here I'm going to set it using the set command. So I'm going in, if we just look at the set command again, here, there it is, then you can see this command can be used to set a fixed value to an item. So we can use this command to set a value into an item on the screen, and this can be from a store or a SQL, but it can also be just a hard-coded value. So if we just try to insert it here, just go with 1. Then we want to insert it into the matrix on the sales quotation. So we want to insert it into the item number column here. And you can see that the matrix is 38 and the column is 1. So we are going to write 38 here and 1, as this is the column. And then we're just going to insert a string, just say a 0. And the value we are going to set is going to be what's in our store 1. So the stores are actually accessible between macros, and they will keep on existing in memory until you overwrite them with something else. So I can just use the store here, even though it was defined in the previous macro. So let's try to also enable debug for this one. Let's just close that one, say add, insert our prompt, and put it inside our if statement down here, and then let's try to run it and see what happens. So the first line will pull out the item code. Down here in the right bottom corner you can actually see the value that is currently in the store. So this is a good way for you to pull out a value using SQL or the dynamic syntax, and then you can verify that the value is actually what you want it to be. But if we keep going, it will open the quotation, insert the customer, and then it will ask me a question. Do you want to insert a default line? Yes, please do. And then it will activate the second macro that will insert the item. In my default items table, I also had the quantity, so I also want to insert that one. So to do this, I just go in and say set again, and the quantity column has 11, and it's a number we want to insert, and then we want to run a SQL to pull out the quantity. Like this. Try to update it. Just disable the debugger on the first one, keep it on the second one, and then we try to press the button again. It will ask me, do we want to insert a default line? Yes. And it will insert the item code, and now it will actually give me an error when I press next here. The reason for it giving me an error is that when you insert an item into SAP, SAP will automatically add a second line down here. So the way the macro system works is that if you don't specify otherwise, it will always work on the last line in the matrix. And as inserting this item here actually creates a second line, it now tries to set the value in this quantity field here instead. And that's not possible, as you can't do it through the UI. So what we want to do is we want to tell the macro that it should actually insert it into the first row instead. So we go in, and after the number here we say first. So this here is the row syntax, and it allows you to specify a row that you want this set command to actually run on. So here you can use first, you can use last, and you can just use a number. But you can also use last -1 to target where it's not the first, but it's also not the last, like in this case. It's the last -1 that you actually want to insert it into. But let's just go ahead and use first. And let's try it again. Yes, it inserts the quantity and the item code. And if I press no to the question, it doesn't do anything. So this way we have actually now created a macro that started out as only being able to open the sales quotation, but it can also open a purchase quotation, and it can insert a default line based on the value of a table. So, as you have seen, I have used the conditional commands, but just to give you an overview of what they are actually about, it is just a way to express if, else, else if, and else. And you can compare using different operators like equal, not equal, greater than, less than, and so on. And you can use it to compare store values, but you can also compare things like just 2 integers in it or 2 strings. And based on how each condition is calculated, you can run one or more commands, and you can also have if and else if inside an existing if, so you can have them nested, as it's called. As you also saw, we can use stores. And stores, as I said, are just variables where you can store data for later use. And stores can be used by, you can just assign a value to it, you can assign a string to it, and as you saw in video, you can also assign a SQL command to it, so the result of the SQL will be saved into the store. You can assign a store to itself or another store, and then you can use the store in the macro command to, for example, write out in a warning the value of your current store. Now we're going to be getting a bit more technical in that I will try to explain the concept of a window stack that we have in B1UP, and we're going to see how we and why we need to use it in a macro. But just to try to explain it, inside B1UP we have a stack of windows that we use to figure out what is the currently active window and what is the old active window and so on. So when you use the activate command, you actually push the current value onto the top of the stack. So if you say activate on a menu UID, for example sales quotation, then the sales quotation will be the currently active window inside B1UP. So it will be the window where you use the set command on and so on. When you close a window using the close command, or you use the keyword PopFormStack, then you actually remove the top window of the stack and you tell B1UP, I'm now done working on this window and I want to work on the previous window. In the case with the sales quotation and the business partner, when we close, or if we close the sales quotation, the business partner would again be the window that we wanted to work on. So normally you don't really need to think about this, because if you just use activate and close, then B1UP does it all for you. But now we're going to see a scenario where we actually need to use the PopFormStack keyword by ourselves. So the scenario is that we want to open the special prices for a business partner, and we want to insert a line here with our default item, and then we want to right click and say period discounts, and then we want to insert a discount with 10% here. So this we want to automate with a macro that should be able to open all the windows, insert the 10% discount, and close all the windows again. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a function button so that we have something to run it off. And we're going to just create a new macro. Let's just add it and open the screen again so that we got the button. And I'll just find the macro again so that we are ready to actually start working with it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check if it's actually possible to insert the discount percentage for the default item by checking if there's actually a default item for this customer. So we'll go ahead again and use the store and a SQL to pull out the default item. And then if there's anything inside the store, so it's not empty, then we want to do something. And otherwise we want to give the end user a message or a status bar message saying that there's no default item, so we can't set it. So from in here you have the option to do a message box, but you can also do just a status bar message. So we can just go in and say no default item. And then we can just use the type error to actually show it in red in the status bar. Insert that one and end. Now the thing we want to do is we want to open and we want to activate the special prices for the business partner, and the menu item actually up here under go to. So we'll just activate this window. And let's just try with this, see if it works. A good idea when you're writing macros is to do it on a step-by-step case, so don't try to make it all at once, but go through it, enable the debugger, and see that it keeps on working as you add more and more logic to it. But let's press the button, see if it works. So we got a default item, and we open the window. That's all good. If we go to this one instead, it should give us a status bar error as it doesn't have a default item. So as you can see, the store is empty and we get an error. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to set the default item into this row here. So again, we'll just use the set command for doing that. And then I'm going to use the row syntax for as last, because consider the scenario the customer already had some special prices. Then I want to always insert them into the last row to not override anything else. So let's just say we want to insert it into the last row, and we want to insert the value of our store. Then when it has been inserted, we want to do a right click, and then we want to press the period discount menu item. So in here, we're just going to focus just to make sure that we are actually in the correct row on the matrix. So we're going to focus our item code, and we're going to do it on last -1, as we now have a second row in there, like this. And then we're going to use the command activate, right click, and we're going to press the right click menu item like this. Let's give it a go. We were on the customer with no default item, so let's just switch over. Open it, just put it over here. Set the value, focus it, and activate the right click. Okay, all good. Now, as we didn't activate the window by actually using a normal activate command. So the normal activate command are these here, called activate, and they will automatically add the period discount to our form stack. But as we didn't use one of those, we need to manually say activate. And if we just look at what this command activate without any parameter actually does, it just tells the system that you're now in a new window. So we're going to say activate to tell the system that we are on a new window. And then we want to insert the discount into the discount field here. Again, just using a set command. And it should just be 10. And then we want to click OK. So to do this, if you want to just click a button, we have a simple command called click. So we're just going to click the button, and that's item 1. And then as we didn't use the close command, if you have used the close command, we would automatically have removed the period discount from the stack, but as you didn't, or as I didn't, then we actually just want to pop the form stack, so let B1UP know that it should now work on the special price window instead. So let's try this. Insert the number, click, and pop the form stack. And then we want to add this one, so we add another click to actually add the configuration. Like this. Let's just disable debug and let it run. Now we are greeted by one of the SAP dialogues asking if we want to update unchanged new rows in green, and we want to actually just press yes to this. Always, as we want to automate the entire thing. So to handle this, we have a command called autopress next pop-up. And if I find it here, the wizard. What it does is that it basically just presses either yes or no on one of SAP's pop-ups. The only thing about it that you need to consider is that this command needs to be run before SAP actually opens the pop-up. What happens is when SAP opens one of those pop-ups, the client actually just waits for you to take an action. So for us to actually be able to click on it, you need to have run this command prior to SAP asking something. But if we just insert it as it is, and we move it up to before we press the click command here, and we update it, then let's just try and run it. As you can see, we didn't get the question anymore, or well, B1UP just pressed yes, and we now got the row in here. And the only thing missing for us to do is that we just need to close the window. Like this. And that's it. We have now created a macro that can insert a 10% discount for an item, and you could expand it to set it up for multiple items or whatever the customer has as a requirement. The next one we're going to be looking at is one that I prepared already. But what it can do is that if you press a button, it will insert some text lines, some subtotals, and some items by default on sales order. So in this case, we apparently often sell servers here at Boyum IT, so we want to create a button that can automatically create a normal server order for us. So I did the button already, but if I just go in and select a customer and I try to press it, then you will see that it will fill out the sales order for me here with some text and some subtotals and so on. And just a second, there's a question. I just need to find the questions. Yeah, sure. I got a question if I could elaborate on what the focus command was used for. The focus command was basically just used for making sure that the correct row or column in the matrix actually had focus. So if I didn't have focus in the correct row and column, then when I tried to activate the menu item, I would either do it on a wrong column and row, or I would do it on a wrong item, on empty. Yeah, row and column. So, yeah. If we look at this macro that actually does this, it's quite long, but it actually just a series of more or less repeated steps. So if we just try to enable debug, then I'll just go through it line by line and tell you what it actually does. So the first thing it does is it sets a row and it defines it as a text row. And then again we use the activate command to tell the system that this row text details is now the active window. Then we insert our text, and here we use, just go ahead, we actually use this keyword here called new line, and it will just insert a new line inside SAP. So this is a good shortcut if you want to add a new line, for example, when you use a text area. Then we click OK. Then we pop the form stack because we're now back on the sales order. Then we add a second row with a text. Input the text again. Okay, PopFormStack. Then we input our item code and the second item code. And then as we want to set the quantity, we say last minus 1 here, because we actually want to set the quantity in the row that we just inserted, just like with the sales quotation. So set the quantity, set a subtotal, input a text again, as you've seen before, item, subtotal, and then we're done. So the macro, while it seems quite long, it's actually really simple, but it allows you to automate the screen by inputting predefined values for what we're actually selling right now. So if you sell a lot of these, it can save you some time. The only thing that we can optimize a bit in this macro here is that we can use the freeze and unfreeze. And the freeze and unfreeze is a system that basically freezes the SAP screen and unfreezes again when we are done with something. This will, in big macros, actually save time, because SAP won't have to refresh the screen every time you change something. And also give a slightly better user experience, as when inserting the lines it won't flicker as much. So if we just look in the wizard on the freeze here, let's see if I can find, there it is. Yeah, then it just freezes the screen and basically makes the commands run faster. So if we insert one of these at the beginning to freeze, then we also need to remember to insert one at the end so that the screen actually unfreezes again. Otherwise it will be locked and you won't be able to interact with it. But if we do this, and we press it again, then it will now run slightly faster and you won't be able to see as much flickering. It will still show all the flickering when you open the text screens, but actually inserting the items won't show as much. If you have big macros, it's important to use the freeze and unfreeze commands, because it will actually make a difference in the speed. The next one I want to show you is how to actually work with the contact person matrix, because we get some questions on that, and it's because it's a bit of a special way compared to how SAP normally does it. But on the contact person, tap on the business partner. This here is actually a matrix. So when you want to interact with it, you actually need to use the row syntax to actually interact with the rows. Or you need to use the column syntax to actually interact with the columns in here. So we'll be creating a small macro that's launched by a validation. And what we want to do is we want to say if this telephone number is already used on another business partner, then we want to make this field here red, and otherwise it should just be white. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a B1 validation that is run when this column is validated. And for doing this, we're just going to create a macro again. Let's just add it at the validation and open the macro again, so that we are ready to start putting some code in here. Oops, let me just move it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to ask the database if this telephone number here is already used. And again, let's use a store and execute a SQL. So we'll just do the normal, see how many of these phone numbers there's already in there, and we're just going to ask the contact person table. We're going to see if telephone 1 is already in there, and here we're going to use the dynamic syntax, but as this is a matrix, we need both the item and the column to actually work with it. And where the card code is different from the currently selected business partner. Like this. So if this count is different from 0, then this phone number already exists. So we want to use the command called backcolor to actually color the matrix. So it's here. So it just enables you to set a backcolor on the item or column by just writing backcolor and specifying what color you want to use. So we want to color the column, and we want to color it red. And let's just try to see if we can make it work. So phone number here is already used, so let's see what happens if we insert it here. So I've apparently forgot something. Let me just see. Oh yeah, here I forgot a 1. Let's just insert it. And let's try again. Yeah, so now it's red. And then, of course, when it's correct again, not in use, then I want it to be white again. So I just need an else here. And I want to color it white when it's okay. So now it should be white. And if I find the phone number that was already in use again here, it should turn red. Like this.
Morten, we have a question, if you have time for that.
Yeah.
somebody wrote in the chat, can you elaborate on what the focus command was used for, please?
Yeah, actually I already answered that one a few minutes ago. So.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. To help you understand everything I have shown here today, I really want to let you know, if you don't already, that we actually have some PDF files that explains many of the things that I have shown today, and they are part of the B1UP download. So if you have the B1UP download and you go into the documentation folder here, then we actually have quite some PDFs down here that explains how, for example, the macro conditional commands works. So it's a guide explaining what is a conditional command and how does it work. And we also have one explaining the dynamic syntax, so that you can get a hang of using both the dynamic syntax for just accessing an item, but also the dynamic syntax for accessing a specific row and column in a matrix. Last, I wanted to let you know about a limitation in the debugger. So if you have used the debugger, you might know that it doesn't work with the line loop. And the reason that it doesn't work with the line loop is that the debugger is run in a separate thread. So when the debugger is actually opened and you press run on it, the line loop will actually already be completed. So the macro will just run on the last line and not the line that the line loop actually went through. So that's a limitation that we have in the system. So if you try to use the debugger and the macro together with the line loop, it won't really work. So this more or less concludes this feature focus session. So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Otherwise, the next feature focus session will be on the 3rd of November, where we're going to be looking at the universal function file exporter, and that's also going to be held by me. Alright, well, thank you very much for attending, and have a nice day.